Alright, so we're asked to factor completely the expression 36x to the fourth plus 68x to the third minus 8x squared. Well, the first thing we're going to need here is we're going to need the GCF. Now, let's see if we have a GCF. Now, what is a GCF? Well, GCF is a factor that goes both into, if you were to divide them, is going to go into 36x to the fourth and also into the term 68x to the third and also into the term negative 8x to the second power. So now let's see how this is going to work. Well, we have the 36, 68, and negative 8. Now, what is the largest number? Because this is the greatest common factor. The largest number that goes into 36, 68, and negative 8. Let's see. Well, I know that 2 goes into all of them, but I can also tell that I could divide 36 by 4. 68 is also divisible by 4, and negative 8 is divisible by 4. So I'm going to say that my greatest common factor for all the coefficients is 4. Now, what about for the x's? X to the fourth, x to the third, and x squared? Well, it turns out that whenever you're looking for the GCF for these variables, usually is the one that has the smallest exponent. So you notice that the one with the smallest exponent is x squared. So that's going to be my part of my GCF. So now we have the GCF is 4x squared. So what do we do with this 4x squared? What are we going to do with this GCF? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to take that GCF, we're going to divide it into this entire expression. So we're going to take 4x squared and divide it into this original expression. Well, how is that going to help us? Well, when you factor a term, what you do is that you actually write it in terms of a product of two things or two or more things. So let's say like we have, say that we have 12. Now, if you want to factor 12, you factor 12 into, let's say, 3 times 4. Now, what if we didn't really know, we only knew one of the factors, say 3. How do we get the second factor? Well, the way we do that is that, say that this is the way I'm going to write. I'm going to keep this blank, and I'm looking for that number. So you notice that because the factor is 3, you have to divide 3 into 12 to find the second factor. So 3 goes into 12 4 times, and therefore the second factor must be 4. So the same idea applies here. We already have one factor, which is the GCF. Now what we're looking for is the second factor. So the second factor here is going to be whatever we get here after we divide by the GCF. So if we divide the first term by 4, eventually we're going to end up getting 9. So let me write that 9 here. Now we have x to the fourth. We're dividing by x squared. That will be x squared. So that's the first answer that we get for the first term if we divide it by 4x squared. But now we got to divide 68x to the third by 4x squared. Well, if you divide that by 4x squared by using the same idea, we're going to end up getting 17x. How do we get 17x? Well, 68 divided by 4 is 17. And x to the third divided by x squared, well, it's just x. Because remember, we subtract the exponents of the variables when we divide. Now, we have a negative 8x squared divided by 4x squared. Well, negative 8 divided by 4 is negative 2. And x squared divided by x squared is 1. So because it's 1, 1 times 2 is 2, so we don't really have to write that 1 next to it. Well, this is the second factor. So let me write second factor. Why is that important? Well, because we're supposed to be factoring, we got to write this as a product of two factors, this expression. So now, the expression that we have originally, which is the 36x to the fourth plus 68x to the third minus 8x squared, is equivalent to the GCF, which is the first factor that we found, times the second factor, which is 9x squared plus 17x minus 2. Now, you notice that we could have been done with this problem already, because maybe we finished the entire factoring, but notice that they ask you to factor completely, meaning that most likely we're going to be able to factor maybe this trinomial here. So let's see how we can do that. Well, when you factor a trinomial, I'm going to rewrite the GCF, by the way, because you always got to carry that down. That's the second factor. You cannot forget to bring it back down. Now, when you factor a trinomial, usually it comes from the product of two binomials. So how we gonna set this up? Well, we want two numbers that multiply to 9x squared. Well, we know that 3x times 3x is 9x squared, and also 9x times x is 9x squared. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna try one way first. Let's try 9x times x. If this does not work, then we try the 3x times 3x here. So we have 9x times x, and now we need two numbers that multiply to 2. Those two numbers are the numbers that are going to go here, the two factors of 2. And in this case, we're going to try maybe 1 and 2. Those are the only possible multiples of 2. Now, notice that if 1 and 2 does not work, well, you should switch them around and try 2 here and 1 there, because eventually it will make a big difference, especially when you have this number here. So now you notice that here we have the 1x, so we're going to do the inner outer to find the sign of the middle term. So we have 1x, that's the middle term, the inner term. Now we need the outer terms. Well, that's 18x, so that's 18x. Now notice that I have not put any signs yet. I didn't put any signs for the numbers, and what I'm planning to do is I'm going to put the signs after I figure out what two numbers add up to this middle term. So now we want to know how can we add 18 and 1 to get 17. Well, if you want them to get to 17, you have to subtract them. So because we got to subtract them, the signs of the two numbers must be different. So we know there must be a positive and a negative number here. But remember that after you add numbers, usually you carry the sign of the largest, meaning that the largest number here, because you want the answer to be positive, must be positive, and the smallest number has to be negative. So therefore the 1 is negative, because that's where the 1x comes from, and this was the number that was missing the sign. And the 2 must be positive, because that's where the 18 came from. So therefore our final answer, as after doing all this factoring, is really this portion here. This is the final answer. Well, I hope you enjoyed it.